I regret to say that it is a historical fact which the RSS has attempted to obscure without any success, in my view. It's a historical fact that the RSS never participated in the anti colonial struggle. If they never participated in the anti colonial struggle, in the nationalist struggle, what does that make them? It makes them the greatest anti national figures. The nation state is a spent force. Unfortunately, we cannot see anything else on the horizon that would take the place of a nation state. But in my view, a nation state is almost intrinsically a xenophobic entity.
Hello and welcome to the Federal. You are watching our very special series to mark the centenary year of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. We have been conducting these interviews over the past several months, and you would have watched a large number of interviews from with scholars and academicians as well as analysts. There have been many questions which we have answered, but the more the questions are answered, we still feel there are still many more left as far as understanding and shedding light on the RSS is concerned. We are going to be tackling some of those very core issues which are very important. And I am going to be talking to Professor Vinay Lal, who is a professor of history and Asian American studies at the University of California, somebody who has worked on several aspects, including cultural history. So, welcome to this program, Professor Vinay Lal, and thank you so much for sparing your time, keeping awake till fairly late in the evening for this conversation because of a huge time difference which we have had to make the adjustment. Thank you so much, and welcome to this program.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be joining you for this conversation.
Let me start with a question which is actually related right to the name of the RSS, Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. We can leave out the Swayamsevak Sangh bit outside because it is volunteer force, if we can actually. But this word Rashtriya, if we actually try to convert it into English, it is, possibly the closest word that we can get is national. Now, national is the word, the core foundation of that. And at that point, it was inspired by the writings of Vinay Damodar Savarkar, V.D. Savarkar as is popularly known, a very small little treatise which actually talked about defining Indian nation and Indian nationhood on the principle of cultural nationalism. For the last 40 odd years that we in the media and academicians also have grappled with this idea, we still do not have a very coherent idea of or a definition of what this cultural nationalism is, what the RSS means in terms of when it says nationalism. This is particularly important because over the last at least 7 to 8 years, there has been this constant argument, that anybody who's this is pushed forward by the Sangh Parivar when I say that there's been this argument that anybody who is not, agreeing with a certain amount of, what we believe in, they are anti-national. So this entire word of nationalism has got really warped without really understanding. So I would want you to try to unravel what the RSS means in terms of nationalism. What does it mean when it says that people like you and me may not be nationalists because we do not agree with some of their principles? You have also said, that how can the RSS be a nationalistic force because it does not believe in the two most important facets of our republic, that is the constitution and the idea of secularism. Now, this entire maze of thoughts that I put forward before you, I would like you to just wade into it and provide some kind of an explanation.
All right. Well, we can spend a month
Yes,
discussing
or
national.
even more, maybe.
Yeah, we can spend a large amount of time discussing it. So let's first begin with a number of basic principles. I'll try to be short, and I'll try to avoid the
Yes.
professorial habit of lecturing, forever. What we are
But
living
your
in.
classrooms have a definite time frame. So
Yeah,
we can consider this to be a classroom also.
yes. So we're living in a nation state system. And the nation state system came into existence in the 17th century with something called the Treaty of Westphalia. The first nation states were European nation states. And essentially, nation states only began to emerge elsewhere in the world in the 20th century when you have decolonization. All right. So we have to make distinction, I would say, between three terms: uh, nation state, nation, and civilization. The first thing to bear in mind is that India is both a nation state and a civilization.
Okay.
And it's been a civilization for much, much longer, obviously, than it's been a nation state. It's only been a nation state since 1947.
Right.
Right? And one of the ways in which you look at nation states is you look at the United Nations. The United Nations is comprised of nation states.
Right.
Right? But a nation state may have several nations in it. And there may be a people who are a nation, but who don't have a nation state.
Okay.
And two examples of that would be the Palestinians and the Kurds.
Okay.
Neither of them has a nation state, but they view themselves as a nation in each
All right.
case. The Basque in Spain would be a third example of that, right? So once we have in place these basic categories, then it becomes a little bit easier, I think, to discuss what is at stake when we think about the RSS, and in particular when we think about that first term, Rashtriya, which is national, right? And the word nationalism, which is associated with it. It's, in my view, not entirely accurate to think that the RSS is, of course, only champion cultural nationalism, because the very fact that essentially it is the RSS which is in power now suggests, of course, that they have gone well beyond cultural nationalism. They are fundamentally running the nation state. In some ways, one can say that, right? That is to say that there is a political component of nationalism, which is the most obvious component, and which usually leads to the creation of a nation state. All right, so that's the first set of things. Now, if we get to the gist of several parts of your, because there are many different parts to your query. I'm not sure I'll address all of them, but let me address a few.
Sure.
It is unquestionably the case, as you have mentioned, and as we are all aware, that the word anti-national is used by the RSS and by those who are friendly to it, even if they're not members of the RSS. Let's use that phrase for a moment, Sangh Parivar, without bothering about whether it's technically
what it really is all about.
And all of those who associate themselves with the Sangh Parivar, whether they're RSS, whether they're BJP, whether they're ABVP or Bajrang Dal or whatever the case might be, they all have used this term as a term of abuse.
Yes.
Abuse to designate, to designate those who are viewed as not being in tandem with, in agreement with the fundamental postulates which govern RSS ideology. Okay, now I think it is safe to say that one of the stated and unstated, sometimes stated, sometimes unstated, arguments of the RSS is its desire, and of the present government, is its desire to create a Hindu Rashtra, okay, which is a Hindu nation state, because it's not a Hindu nation only. There's a Hindu nation state, and that would mean, of course, a number of things. It could mean that others who are not Hindus could live in that Hindu nation state, which is something, by the way, that is mentioned by Savarkar and then is subsequently mentioned by Golwalkar. All right, and both in A Bunch of Thoughts and in his other book, We Are Nation, or Defined, whatever that title is, right? That others who are not Hindus can live in a Hindu Rashtra at the pleasure of the Hindu. At the
Right.
that is on the terms.
Provided they accept that they are also Hindus. They can practice their faith, but
Well,
inside their homes.
yeah.
But they have to accept that they are Hindus if they want to be part of this nation state.
So that's where there is room for discussion, in the sense that if you're living at the pleasure of the Hindu, the implication is that you need not be a Hindu. See, this is where it gets a little complicated, because if you go back to Savarkar, he mentions that who is a Hindu really? Someone who accepts Hindustan as his Matrabhumi, Pitrabhumi, and Punya Bhumi.
Right.
All three. Okay, so the problem, of course, with the non-Hindu is that he or she doesn't accept Hindustan as their Punya Bhumi. Their Punya Bhumi is, let's say, Jerusalem or Mecca or whatever the case might be, Baghdad, or let's say Qom,
But as
okay,
far as religions like Buddhism, Jainism, or Sikhism is concerned, they
yeah.
are considered to be those religions, and their followers are those whose Punya Bhumi is within this Hindu nation state.
Oh, yes, absolutely. But you see, this is where even the Constitution, in a manner of speaking, really says that.
That's right.
Okay, I mean, we have
Article
to.
25 is. Yes.
It does. See, but by the way, there is a lot of ambivalence about that, because the Constitution says very clearly in some places that for the purposes of that particular article, wherever it appears, it's in more than one place. There are a number of footnotes
Yes.
as well, that that the definition of a Hindu here
Include.
includes a person who is a Buddhist, a Sikh, a Jain, etc. Right? Because the supposition is that those are all religions that were born on the soil of India, and they're essentially branches of the mother religion. Okay. And by the way, this is all apart from the consideration which almost no one in the debate ever mentions, which is that the idea of religion is, in my view and in the view of at least a small number of scholars, an entire novelty to Indian ways of thinking, historically speaking. That is, that there is no such thing called religion, okay, until really the late 18th century, early 19th century, when someone like Ram Mohan Roy in Bengal essentially is going to begin to reshape Hinduism in the image of Protestant Christianity. Because when we say religion, see, for a religion scholar, the template for that is Protestant Christianity. And there is a story that has been told by a number of scholars in disparate works that virtually every so-called religion today is actually a Protestantized version of that faith, although the practitioners may be wholly unaware of that. And this is why when you go to Ram Mohan Roy, you'll be surprised to know how many tracts he wrote where he basically is trying to, if I may put it this way, put a Protestant gloss on what he understands as Hinduism, you see. Okay. But this is a question that never comes up in any discussion of the RSS or this or that, because my own view of the matter is that none of the ideologues of the RSS had the remotest idea of what all of this really could possibly mean when they begin to think about something called Hinduism. All right. That's another dimension of the story. Now, let's move to yet another aspect of it, which again stems from your query. You see, okay. So what does it mean to call it Nash? Because your question was, it's a Rashtriya Swayam Sevak Sangh, and you said let's leave out the second two terms. Let's focus on the national. So what does it mean to be national? Now, I think we have to be very clear that the RSS has indicated very clearly. And I urge all people who are viewing this and all readers otherwise to go to the 14th August 1947 issue of the Organizer, which is the organ of opinion or the vehicle of the RSS. And in there, you see a total mockery being made of the national flag. Okay, and that very issue, which is the eve of independence, because hours later, so to speak, let's just say that it came out on the morning of the 14th, hours later, Jawaharlal Nehru was going to make obviously that very famous speech, we have a tryst with destiny, etc. We are all aware of that. All right. And it's a tricolored flag, as we know, and in a number of places, including that 1947 issue, 14th August 1947 issue, the argument is made this tricolor flag is kind of ridiculous because what do these colors stand for? And then he says, the nationalists, the Congress walas have argued that the orange stands for the Hindu, the green stands for the Muslim community, and then the white stands for all other communities. And then, of course, the objection that is made in that article is that, well, why is it that the Muslim is singled out from all the other communities? In other words, why should it not simply be Hindus and then all other communities, right?
Right.
So basically, the argument here is that the national flag is an appeasement to the Muslims. You see, and the first thing we have to understand is that what really makes for a nation state, you need three components at the very basic, but you need something else, which I'll get in just a moment. Which again, you have to go to a very fantastic, the locus classicus essay on what is a nation. But let's go to the three components. Very simply, a constitution, an adherence to a constitution, and once again, let us be very clear that the RSS on multiple occasions has
rejected the constitution.
That this constitution is an illegitimate constitution.
That's right.
Okay, it's a nonsensical constitution. That the only constitution that India could have had, which would have made sense for the population, was Manusmriti. Okay, or something emanating from the Manusmriti.
From that.
Yeah. All right. So
the Indian constitution was copied from the British, constitutions which were imposed during colonial rule.
Yeah, that's right. And by the way, it's not to say that there isn't some merit in the argument, possibly, that the Constitution has certain features which are obviously go back to the colonial period. In fact, some people could argue even much more forcefully, and I would be among those, that large number of its features go back to the Government of India Act of 1935.
1935, that's right.
Okay, all right. So, but the point is that there was an incredible set of debates, which are the Constituent Assembly debates, and there are lots of novelties in the Constitution. If somebody says that this Constitution has borrowed lock, stock, and barrel from the West, they don't know what they're talking about. It's very simple, okay? Because the whole idea, for example, of directive principles, okay, is very distinct, actually.
Yes.
Okay, it's very distinct, which is very different from the fundamental rights. All right. So the Constitution, the anthem, and we can have a long discussion on that. Okay.
The anthem is something that I'll come to right away.
Yeah.
After we finish talking about this.
And the flag, those are the three components. And I'm saying that all three have actually been really, in a way, repudiated repeatedly and insistently by the RSS right from day one down to the present day. It's a matter of historical record. Okay.
That's right.
Now, there's one more interesting thing. I mean, there are lots more interesting things, but I'll mention one because this is where the story gets to be far more complex and would require a much longer discussion. See, Ernest Renan was a French scholar who wrote what is really the classic essay. It's the essay that every serious student of nationalism studies at some point. The essay is simply called "What is a Nation?" Okay. So if you say what he does is he uses a kind of scientific method, because he'll give you a definition and then he'll falsify it. So if you say, for example,
Okay.
a nation is a group of people who share a common religion, well, you can easily falsify that. You can easily falsify it, because
Yes.
you can look at a group of people in lots of different places, right? Who are part of a nation, but who don't share the same religion. And again, within the religion, even with Christianity, some may be Protestant, some may be Catholics, and there's a huge difference. Just think about the Protestant Catholic wars, the wars of the Reformation and the Counter Reformation, which plagued Europe for hundreds of years in a way. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. But what if you said, well, a nation is a group of people who share a common language? Well, look at India. What you've got is hundreds of languages,
Hundreds of languages.
hundreds, right? So you can falsify. If you said, oh, they belong to the same racial stock, you look at a very small country like Switzerland, or you look at a country like Belgium, and you'll see that they're Flemish speaking and French speaking, etc. Okay, any number of things that you say people
Even
have in
Sri
common.
Lanka within the neighborhood,
Yeah. But I'm
Why go
just
so far
I'm
to
spreading
Sri
it
Lanka?
out. Now Renan says, but it takes something else to be a nation. Okay, it
Mhm.
takes an act of forgetfulness. You have to will, consciously or unconsciously, to forget something. Okay.
Hmm.
Now, if I had to put it in very dramatic terms, you see what the RSS, what they would like to do, but of
Hmm.
course they can't, because the presence of the Muslim is overt, is they would like to have a kind of, if I may say, willful forgetting of the Muslim. But the way
Right.
it really works is the United States is a very good example, that the United States had to put forward a narrative, and what people had to agree to forget, so to speak, was the genocidal origins of that country.
Exactly.
You can't go around proclaiming yourself as the world's greatest democracy and champion of human rights when you've committed untold number of genocides against, for example, the Native Americans, against black people, and then of course overseas, etc. Okay,
I can
so
never forget the book "Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee," which I read, as a student.
yes,
Remained
well, that
embedded in our consciousness.
that's right. So you see, it requires an act of forgetting. Okay,
Yes.
now this is where I'm saying we can get into a lot more complicated discussions. I'm just giving you an illustration of
That's
that
right.
when Renan introduces something like this. Okay, right? So the gist of it, I think, would now be this: that
Yes.
I think, in fact, given everything we know about the RSS, given what we know about its activities, for example, if let's take one further line of argumentation, and I'll end with that so that you can move to your next question. In the pre 1947 period, before
Mhm.
independence, the word nationalism can be equated with anti-colonial as well.
Okay.
Okay? So you can speak of the nationalist struggle, or you can speak of the anti-colonial struggle. And I think
Okay. They were used, as synonyms quite often.
yeah, that's right. That's what I'm saying. You can use either, and people will understand fully that when you
Yes.
say anti-colonial struggle, and then you use the phrase nationalist struggle, you're speaking about the same thing.
Yes. Same thing.
Now, I regret to say that it is a historical fact which the RSS has attempted to obscure without any success, in my view. It's a historical fact that the RSS never participated in the anti colonial struggle.
That's true.
Okay? Now, if they never,
Historically, it's absolutely true.
yeah, if they never participated in the anti colonial struggle, in the nationalist struggle, what does that make them? It makes them the greatest anti national figures in Indian
That's right.
history. In Indian history, all right. I'm being very clear about this. I myself don't like to use language such as anti-national, because we know the way it's used in India today. It's, as is started by saying, it's used as a word of abuse, and it's one of those words which bears what the philosopher Wittgenstein described as family resemblances with other terms such as urban naxals, Tukre Tukre
Yes.
gang, Khan Market gang, referring to, of course, the Khan Market in Delhi. There are a number of other terms which all are part of the same family, if I may put it this way. Okay, right? And I think that one should avoid using it. But since the RSS has actually used this term anti-national to essentially erode the credibility of anyone who dares to take a different view, I think it's appropriate to suggest and to argue, as I am, that everything on the record shows that it is the RSS which is the most profoundly anti national organization. And I've given several different arguments, not only this one,
Yes, you have, and it's
going
a
back.
very
Yeah,
it's a very provocative way of saying, that they are possibly the biggest anti-national forces in the country at the moment. That's one of the
absolutely.
paradoxes that we live with. That an organization which has the idea of national in its template, in its name, is actually not. I want to move on to the 3 points which you made. The very important and only the topical one, the extremely contemporary one. They are not the anthem. Now,
Yes.
we know that, right from the time that we were children, we knew that there was some kind of an ambiguity about our anthem. There was the national anthem, there was the national song,
Yeah.
Janagana Mana was there, but somewhere behind people said, no, Vande Mataram is also important. But right from the time that we were children, we ended up learning Janagana Mana, not really. And I'm saying this from a personal, standpoint, that not the Vande Mataram. I possibly, if you ask me immediately, wake me up in the middle of the night, I would be able to recite Janagana Mana, not Vande Mataram. And I'm sure that the majority of Indians wouldn't be able to do that. Now, very recently, the government has actually, in a way, it is put the Vande Mataram at either the same pedestal or maybe
Yeah.
even a notch higher, because
Yeah.
as people say that in official functions now the Vande Mataram is rendered the full Vande Mataram, not the
Yeah.
first paragraph. But this honor is not being given to the Janagana Mana. Just the first paragraph continues to be sung after the Vande Mataram. So behind this, what is the politics? I want to understand from you.
Okay. So once again, there is a history to all of
There
this.
is.
So
There is.
we know that, but I'm going to begin actually, rather than arriving at the most interesting thing that I want to offer, what I think is the most interesting thing, I'm going to begin with that and then work my
Okay.
way backwards.
Right.
See, I think we have to. This is where it means to speak of India as a civilization.
Right.
Remember, I started by saying India is a civilization, not only a nation state.
That's right.
When we obsess about an anthem, we are speaking only as people of a nation state, which
Right.
frankly, no one else has to accept it. But there are people like myself who have now been arguing, and I think this argument is becoming a little bit more evident and is getting a lot more traction than it would have 20 years ago. The nation state is a spent force. Unfortunately, we cannot see anything else on the horizon that would take the place of a nation state. But in my view, a nation state is almost intrinsically a xenophobic entity. Okay, it is an intolerant
Okay.
entity because it creates a kind of homogenization, right? And if you
Right.
allow me the latitude, I just want to first, you know, uh, 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 embellish this, and as I said, work my way backwards,
Right.
because we will see that India has more than actually just Vande Mataram and Jana Gana Mana. Okay,
Okay.
and we should relish in the fact that India is perhaps the only civilization and the only nation state in the world that has thus far been able to live with what I'm going to describe as an incredible kind of ambiguity, an incredible kind of tolerance about this. So
That's
when I
right.
said it has more than three, more than these two, I meant that there is a third, okay, de facto
That's
kind
right.
of national anthem or song in some ways, which in some respects is actually the most popular. And certainly there have
Yes.
been times when it has been most popular. And I'm referring, of course, to the composition Sare Jahan Se Acha Hindustan Hamara, which was, of
That's right.
course, composed by Sir Muhammad Iqbal. And he died, of course, before the partition. Because I don't know if he would have changed, the lyrics of that. Although he did improve on that song with another song later on, a few years later, but that's another story. Now let's consider first the following: that a national anthem is almost invariably in something which is called the national language.
Hmm.
Okay, so if you have a national anthem in the United States, it's in the national language, and that national language is English. The
English.
national anthem is not in Polish, even though there are lots of Polish immigrants, and it's not in German, even though there are lots of German immigrants. Right now,
Right.
which of these three is in a so-called national language? The first thing is we don't actually really have a national language.
No,
We,
we
we
don't.
we don't. You see, we don't have a national language, and I think it's wonderful that we don't. Now, assuming that you said that de facto, just simply de facto, Hindi can take the place of the national language simply because it is the language which the largest number of speakers. That's all. Okay, but I'm saying, of course, I understand that it's not the national language. There is an official language which is different, but national language, no, we don't have one. But let's just assume that it was Hindi.
Mhm.
What's interesting is neither of these three compositions is in Hindi.
The
Okay.
closest can be Sare Jahan Se Acha.
Yes, the closest, because it's in what you might call Hindustani. Okay.
Yes.
Hindustani, but leaning more towards the Urdu because some of it
That's right.
is a little bit more difficult, if I may put it this way, right?
Yes.
And we
Yes.
know we know that Hindustani kind of occupies the middle spoken ground between Urdu and Hindi.
And
Um, okay, the
that's right.
Hindi is a more Sanskritized form of Hindustani. That's one way to think about it. All right, uh,
Right.
that's the closest, but it's not. Okay, and Vande Matram is in Bangla, and it's not even in Cholit Bangla. It's in Shadu
Pretty
Bangla.
archaic.
Yeah, it's in High Bangla.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Okay, and so in fact, actually, it's not the common form of Bangla that most
No, definitely not.
yeah, that Bangla speakers will understand. And Jana Gana Mana again is really in a way a combination of Shadu Bangla and Sanskrit, if I may put it this way. Okay,
Yes.
so
Yes.
we have an incredible anomaly. Think of it. I mean, you cannot find this situation anywhere else in the world where you have, and somebody might say, well, why am I saying Sare Jahan Se Acha? Well, I would invite people to go and watch Hindi films of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s and see
Yeah.
which song appears in most of these films. There's a 1975 film which everybody in India who's interested in cinema knows. I wrote a whole book on that one single film. That film is called The Var. Okay,
That's right.
with Amitabh Bachchan. And there's this wonderful scene where Vijay, the older boy, this is when the family has migrated, the mother and the two boys, because the father has absconded. They're
Right.
migrated to Bombay and they're living under a bridge. And the younger boy starts to go to school. The older one, Vijay, who's going to be played as an adult by Amitabh Bachchan,
Mm.
right? He is the one who's polishing the shoes. He's the one who's earning the livelihood. And there's
Right.
this wonderful scene where very wistfully he's standing outside the school, and guess what song is playing? Sare Jahan Se Acha
That's right.
Hindustan Hamara. Okay, why that song? And
Yeah.
I can tell you there are many Hindi films where you see that. You see, there is no question in my mind that these three, in a way, all have what we might describe as equal status in the
Okay.
imagination Some people might elevate one over the other, but I am saying the following now. I am saying that this is the strength of India as a civilization. As India gradually loses its civilizational ethos, one of the things that the RSS is doing is, ironically, it's making India lose its civilizational ethos and making India think only as a nation state. A nation state will mean you have only one, okay, and you have it in the national language, right? And if neither of these, none of
It's
these,
going to be a very homogeneous,
yeah,
nation state.
it's a homogenizing enterprise,
So we
which
will
is
lose our
why,
diversity.
yes, because the first thing that a nation state does after creating a national anthem, okay, and a constitution, and a flag, is it creates a culture of textbooks, including history textbooks. Okay. And what
Yes.
does a history textbook do? It homogenizes a very large body of knowledge. Why do you think there have been so many disputes in India over the content of textbooks? And by the way, these history textbook wars have been fought in at least 35 countries that I know of. Okay. And
That's
at
very
least,
interesting.
yes, yes, very acute history, very acute ideological wars over the contents of textbooks. Because typically a person will know the history through the textbook before they know it through anything else. And so, therefore, the textbook becomes a kind of an official mandate by which you pass on a certain kind of historical narrative to the next generation and to generations thereafter, you see. Okay. And so, what it does is it doesn't simply synthesize, it homogenizes, it levels
Okay.
out things, you see. So one has to think about all of that when one is thinking of this now. Therefore, I've already, as I said, I'm working from my position, and then we can go back and say, okay, what were the origins of this? And I'll be very brief about this. So
Yes.
we know that Vande Mataram, of course, actually appears in a novel by Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, right?
That's
And
right. In the late 19th century.
that's right, Anando Moth, 1882. But actually, the song was written before.
Before.
It
Yes.
was written before. Not many people, most people aren't aware of that. They just think it first appeared, and it was actually written some years before, and then it appears in this. And I can tell you that already by the late 1800s, some disputes started to arise.
That's right.
Okay, over the singing of this song. There is a very interesting book by this by one of our Bengali babus, Nera Chaudhary. Okay,
Hmm.
the book is called Autobiography of an Unknown Indian,
Right.
and he says that in his childhood he can remember that this song was sung as a provocation to Muslims.
To Muslims. That's right.
Yeah, yeah.
Is-
He says that very clearly. He says
Yes.
that very clearly, but there are other places where you see that too. So, so these controversies have
No,
been
you
going
say
on.
you see this in the words of Rabindranath Tagore in the 1930s, late 1930s, when the debate has come up, and he very clearly writes back to various people in the Congress, including Nehru. And he says he accepts the point that yes, it's a song which actually stares at the Muslims and provokes them. So
Absolutely, absolutely, and there were so I mean, if you had to look at two key moments, there are several in the whole history of Vande Mataram. So one is 1937. Because the working committee of Congress, the Congress working
yes,
committee, they had a discussion about this. There is a letter that is actually written by Nehru, a private letter before that committee meeting, where he says that he admires some portions of the song, but he understands that it has created a lot of unease among Muslims
that's right.
over the last many years. Okay,
Mm.
and so then the working committee actually appointed a subcommittee, and
Mm.
the members of that subcommittee included Jawaharlal Nehru, included Subhash Bose, Maulana Azad, right? And the decision
Right.
they took was that the first two, okay, the first two paragraphs of this, or the first two verses, if you want to put it that way, would be
sung at Congress meetings.
would be sung, and the rest would be omitted, because the first two were really a homage to the idea of India as the motherland.
Right.
All right, and that the rest were much more provocative, and therefore they would be omitted. But then this question came up for discussion again during the Constituent Assembly debates. And there, without getting into all the discussion, because it's a long discussion and it's publicly accessible, of course.
Available, yes.
Okay, the gist of it is that Rajendra Prasad announced shortly before the end of the discussions
that is the last announcement in the Constituent Assembly.
Yeah, the Constituent Assembly announced that the decision had been taken that Jana Gana Mana would be the national anthem, and Vande Mataram would be conferred equal status as a national song. As a national song. All right. And so that was the accommodation, but it's very clear from everything that has happened since the late 1800s that all the discussions and all the accommodations and all of that obviously have still not led to a resolution that is to the satisfaction of everyone, given that the
did not lead to a resolution, but now we have an imposition which has happened in recent months by the government. So we what the RSS couldn't come to terms with, we can actually say that has finally been left unresolved but imposed on the nation. And I will have to stop here, because as you said right at the beginning, that we could talk for months on what we actually embarked on, start talking about. We have already spoken about for a fairly long period of time, and I would like to leave it at that, because I would like the audience to be able to absorb what has been discussed, what Professor Vinay Lal has spoken about. This has been a very engaged conversation, I would say, and I still have a huge long list of points which I wanted to raise with you, which we shall come back at some point. I have also added some more to the list of subjects which I want to, points which I want to discuss with you, including the information that there are 35 countries in the world which have had wars over history, just the way that not exactly, military wars, but actually, verbal wars, or the ideas over what their history should be, just the way it has been there in India. You talk about history, then the moment is that what is India's history? It opens up an entirely different chapter. Thank you very much for having explained very lucidly some very important points which we have never really been able to understand, and especially your views about the Indian nation state and your idea about the Indian nation state actually going into the past. So, thank you.